Well, good evening. My name is Patrick Baker, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Vice President for Greater Mankato Growth. I want to thank you all for attending this evening's forum between the candidates vying to represent District 19B in the Minnesota House of Representatives. This forum is presented by Greater Mankato Growth and Radio Mankato. I'd also like to thank Minnesota State University Mankato for hosting us this evening and allowing us to use this space. Additionally, I'd like to thank KTV, Mankato's public access TV station, for recording this event. Before I address some housekeeping items for this evening's event, I want to let you know that in addition to this forum, Greater Mankato Growth has also hosted a number of forums throughout the month of October for candidates for federal, state, and local office. You can view the full lineup of these forums and view links to video recordings at greatermankato.com/forum. In addition, Greater Mankato Growth recently published our online candidate profiles. This website allows voters to view information submitted directly by the candidates running in our region, including biographical information, as well as their response to a questionnaire. The public can view these candidate portals at greatermankato.com/candidates. Now, turning to tonight's forum. First, I'd like to set out a few expectations for our audience to help us present an engaging and civil dialogue this evening. We have more questions than we have time for, so we ask that you help us make the most of our time by holding your applause until the end of the forum and that there be no shouting or heckling, particularly of the moderators. For those of you that have been to a few of these, that joke's probably getting a little old by now. This evening's format is as follows. Each candidate will be allowed 3 minutes to make opening and closing remarks, while our moderators will hold candidates to approximately 2-minute responses. This evening, we're more interested in engaging in robust discussion and getting these candidates' thoughts on an issue, so it may take longer in some instances. Any follow-up questions or discussion will be at the discretion of our moderators. And speaking of moderators, I'm joined this evening by my co-moderator, Annette Weston with KTOE News. Finally, it's my pleasure to introduce the candidates for this evening's forum. To my immediate right is Representative Jack Considine. He is the DFL candidate. And on my further to the right is, it just works out perfectly, Joe Steck is the Republican candidate. So now I'd like to invite Mr. Considine to present your opening statement.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you, Annette. Is this on?
It's on.
Okay, I can't tell. As he said, I am your current state representative, and I am running for re-election. And as I say at the doors, most of the time I'd really like to get re-elected. Why? There are some things that I am still very passionate about. Home health aides, personal care attendants. Right now we're down, we have approximately 9,000 openings that we're having trouble filling. They are getting paid at 40% of the poverty level. In Greater Minnesota, their average salary is $11 an hour. If they have children, they qualify for food stamps to feed them. I think this is disgraceful, and I think it is an embarrassment to the state. Daycare is a problem. We have lost 4,000 daycare providers since 2011. Last year, Senator Frentz, Clark Johnson, and myself went up and met with DHS in December, asked them to start reviewing the regulations. We will continue that work. We did, on a bipartisan manner last year, we did repeal a couple of those regulations, but there are a number more that need to be reviewed. Finally, the prison system. We've had 2 guards die since July. We need to address the staffing issues in the prison. I think that's critical. We've never had people die before in prison staff, and that's terrible. Those would be my 3 top priorities. Why would you vote for me? Well, while we've had some real bumps in the last 4 years, I've been in the minority, I've actually been really very successful in bringing back money for investments in education, money investments for jobs, money investment in safety. All told, it totals about $260 million, and I would put that up against any other representative in the state. I do serve on the Capital Investment Committee. I serve on the Health and Human Services Finance Committee, and I serve on the Public Safety Committee. In fact, I was invited today to go up and address the Minnesota Corrections Association, and in their invitation, they said I was their favorite representative. I'm not sure if that's actually true or not, but I had to turn it down because of the forum. My constituents always come first. The best part of the job is when you can help a constituent, and some of the letters to the editor have been people that have done so. There was a young man that his son needed surgery. They had spent 3 months trying to get their insurance straightened out, and he called me, and with the help of some great staff up at the Capitol, 24 hours later they were scheduling that surgery. Another gentleman wrote in today. His house was falling into the Minnesota River, and he was getting 75% of what it was worth, working with the DNR, and again, some great staff up there. This one took a little while, but we were able to get 100% of the value of his house for him. And last, a small businessman here in town that was going to lose his business because of a small change in the regulations at the Department of Transportation. And in this one, I teamed with a Republican representative from central Minnesota who had a bus company that was having the same problems. Together, we got a law passed, or legislation passed, to fix that, and the young man is still in business today. So, and I'd tell you the one other time that I was really having a bad day, walked around the corner, and there was the East High math team. And it was just a blast to run into them, stop, give them a tour. Those are the highs for being a state representative. I'm going to wrap up with a little promise that I made earlier. Hi, Elliot. Hi, Mary. Hi, Lily. Hi, Regan. Those are the 4 young people that are in the audience tonight, and I promised them I'd say hi from the front. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack.
Thanks.
Joe.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out today. I know everyone has busy schedules. Thank you, GMG, KTOE, KMV, for hosting this, MSU. If you don't know my story, I was born and raised in Mankato. Joined the Air Force. I refueled planes in the air for 4 years, came back, went to college here, and then started financial planning firm service, selling insurance and financial needs, working with businesses in the area. And then I worked for Voke Transfer as a salesman there in the trades, and then I went over to Hutchinson Manufacturing as their salesman and worked throughout the state. 2 years into that position, I became sick, and it took 35 different doctors in 2.5 years to figure out what was wrong with me. And in the meantime, I had to relearn how to walk, and I started having tremors, relearn how to talk, go to speech therapy. And what they came up with, their best of their knowledge, was I had chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, which basically meant they didn't know what was wrong with me. And so my life went on. I found a doctor, a chiropractor that did brain-based therapy, some pretty advanced stuff. And he got me so I could walk again and could sort of work. And I thought things were going to go fine. And in the meantime, I had spent virtually all my money trying to get better. Started working, got sick again. And to make a long story short, 5 years ago, they started telling me that I was having panic disorders. Those panic disorders ended up being heart problems that were misdiagnosed by the VA. And last October, I ended up having triple bypass surgery. And that was an adventure in itself. And so through that whole process, I became homeless and virtually lost everything. If it wasn't for some of the people out here, I would have been on the street. Our government failed me miserably. During that time, I learned compassion. I always thought I knew what empathy was, but now I became really empathetic because I lived it. I got healthy, and decided that it's time for me to make some changes for society and run for office. Now, the last 5 years, certainly 2013, to keep my sanity and to keep me from virtually killing myself, because I thought it every day, I started a newspaper called the Mankato Times. I went out in the community. I was always a community guy, but I really got into the community, started working with groups that were underserved. They weren't getting coverage. Started covering them, started covering girls' sports. And I feel bad since I've been campaigning, I haven't covered any of the sports, and usually I am. The West girls are playing tonight in soccer, Holy Angels, and I feel bad that I've missed that, but hopefully they win. But those are some of the things that I learned and really learned about our community here and in Eagle Lake. I'm probably uniquely qualified for this position because I've had so many experiences. In the military, I had some of the best training in the world. I was a medical platoon officer in the Army. I was an infantry platoon officer. I was an executive officer for a battalion. I had people's lives in my hand. Running a newspaper, doing interviews, I learned more about our community than I ever thought I would. Losing everything, I learned about our system and the weaknesses. And we have a lot of weaknesses. We have a lot of strengths. But there's no way a veteran should be homeless. I wasn't taken care of until, thank you, Anette, for doing a story on me. Some of these problems got resolved. But no one was listening. And we need people to listen, and not only listen, is to resolve problems. Starting the paper, I made connections with politicians up and down the state, relationships with everyone. I mean, I've ran press releases, I've talked to them, and I think I'm uniquely qualified for this position. So that's why I'm running, and hopefully I can earn your support. Thank you.
All right, so the best way probably to do this is trade on and off so it's fair. And so, Jack, you're sitting closer. I'll give you the first question. A lot of people claim that they hate the current level of divisiveness and partisanship that's in the legislature, and a lot of people think it's getting even worse these days. And I'd like to know how you view the state's current political climate and how you'd use your role as an elected leader to shape that climate or change it going forward.
There is a lot of divisiveness. The other side of the coin, though, is up at the state legislature, about 80% of the business we do is virtually unanimous. The votes are 130 to nothing or 129 to 2 on the good government day-to-day stuff. The other 20%, it does get very contentious. Frankly, I would point again to my record. Last session, I co-authored 114 bills. Of that 114, 40, more than a third, came from the other side of the aisle. If I've seen good ideas, I haven't hesitated to sign on. Doesn't matter who the author is. I would also point to the two articles from the Pioneer Press. Last year, the first year, they ranked us 1 to 134 based on partisanship, and I was 124. There were 10 people that were considered less partisan, and frankly, they were all Democrats. Last year, they changed the format, and I fell right in the middle of the group that worked together. So, again, my record would show you that I have reached across the aisle, and I have been willing to do so. There are things that we can do, though. More transparency, getting rid of omnibus bills, making conference committees open to the public, frankly, not running past midnight. So that I felt like times that we ran past midnight simply so that we could miss TV and newspaper deadlines and people wouldn't be watching on TV. So there are some procedural things that I think would be really helpful. And of course, the biggest thing is to have an engaged public. If people are paying attention and watching, they will hold their representatives accountable, and I would think you would get a tremendous improvement in that if people paid attention and gave us input. Thank you.
All right, and Joe, I'll restate the question for you. A lot of people claim they hate the current level of divisiveness and partisanship in the legislature, and a lot of people think it's getting worse. How would you view the state's current political climate, and then how would you use the role as an elected official to create change?
There's always going to be partisanship on some core issues. I mean, it's a caucus system, and that's the way it works. I tend to get along with everyone. I tend to listen to everyone. We may not agree, but there's ways to work it out. Sometimes you have to make compromises, other than your core beliefs, but you have to make compromises on things, and that's one of the biggest. I've learned over the years to make not concessions, but to get people to work together. And sometimes that's a lot more difficult than you'd think, to get people that are diametrically opposed to start seeing the same point. You had to do that when you work in big groups, and I've worked in big groups a lot of times. You have to spell out what you want to have accomplished, and take the best ideas and the worst ideas and mix them together sometimes. I know Jack here, every time I've heard him on the radio, every time I've seen his letters that he sends press releases out, he's blamed the Republicans all the time. And that's not concession, that's not working with people, that's putting a blame. And that doesn't cut it. I mean, it just absolutely doesn't cut it when that stuff happens, because people get upset when you sit and call them names and blame them all the time. And that's something I don't do, and that's something I will not do. If you don't get something resolved, I'm to blame also then, because you have to find a way to work together. So that's what I would do.
Jack, I did get you called out there. So
Yeah, I just, first of all, I don't call people names, and I resent that. And if you are doing an accurate assessment of what's going on, that's not blaming, that's an accurate assessment.
anything to add to that?
That's your opinion. That's not an accurate assessment.
Okay. All right. Let's talk a little bit some of the issues. I know, Jack, you brought up a couple things you want to look at the Capitol. But the question is, when you get to the legislature and you have the chance to introduce bills with your name on them, what are the first 2 or 3 bills that you will personally introduce and personally work to try to get through the legislature? And Joe, we'll start with you on that one.
Well, number one would probably be, well, there really can be no number one. Healthcare is huge. Childcare is huge. Those are major problems. You see people, lack of childcare now, people dropping out because of over-regulations. Healthcare, the $2,500 savings we're going to have, the keep your doctor, that stuff didn't work. Single payer practically killed me. So those 2 things would be huge. And then you look at sentencing reform. We have a veterans court. We need to start doing the same thing with people when they get arrested for drugs that are habitual drug users. We need to get them taken care of. They don't need to be in jail. They need reform there, sentencing reform with that. So those would be 3 of the huge things.
Okay. Jack?
Okay, I didn't actually hear a bill in there. I will have 3 or 4 the very first day. One bill will deal with home health aides and personal care attendants and getting a raise for them. Another bill will be for the Department of Corrections, and it will be for increasing staffing in the prisons and making them safe. The third bill will deal with child care, and it will be a revamping of the CCAP grants We will be looking at how to fix those and get proper payment and get them done immediately. Thank you.
All right. Well, Minnesota's transportation infrastructure faces funding challenges at all levels, including a huge shortfall that's over the next 20 years. We'll need about $600 million to catch up. But the legislature and the governor have been able to sort of agree on a long-term strategy and how we come up with that money. How do you propose addressing the transportation challenges? And we'll start with Jack.
Okay, that one's no secret. I have been consistently saying that we need to raise the gas tax. We are 28th in the nation on gas tax. We are not near the top on gas tax. We also have, in Minnesota, probably the single toughest set of weather conditions outside of inland Alaska to deal with it. When that polar vortex comes down, it wraps right around Minnesota. We have very difficult conditions. Everybody remembers where they were and what they were doing when that bridge collapsed, what was it, 8 years ago now? And we still have not dealt with this. For the last 4 years, the Republicans have been in the majority, and they have not come up with a different funding mechanism for this. The gas tax is as close as we get to a user fee. We have semis coming through that tear up our roads. They would help pay for it. We have a huge tourism industry in Minnesota. They would help pay for it. If one of the proposals for the Republicans was a huge increase in the tab fees. Well, if you're on a fixed income and you're trying to pinch your pennies, having that kind of a jump all at one time is extremely difficult. But if you're using your car and going to the grocery store once a week, the gas tax actually works out pretty well for you. There was one vote. Representative Petersburg last year in 2017 got up, and it was a gotcha vote. He offered amendment on the gas tax and then said, don't vote for it. And so everybody in the chamber voted no, except for me. It was 1 to 132. I've not tried to hide this. I think it's the way to go. And frankly, in 4 years, there's not been a better idea show up in the legislature. We need to fund it, and we need to have a long-term transportation plan. Last year, going to the Department of Corrections and talking to the local engineer just before the session started, I realized that he was giving me 2 and 3 contingency plans. Now, these contingency plans all cost money and all cost resources. And as the words were coming out of my mouth, which was, why are you doing this, it realized that he had no clue as to what the legislature was going to do that year. So he had to have a couple of contingency plans ready to go. There would be huge savings right there if they didn't have to do contingency plans, if we had a long-term transportation plan and we knew the funding was coming. Pennsylvania, which has a Republican dominated legislature and governor, is at 58 cents a gallon. We're at 28 cents a gallon. 12 cents, we would still be 18 cents a gallon underneath them. So again, 4 years, they've not come up with a different plan. So let's move forward, get the gas tax done, and get a long-term transportation plan.
Joe, would you like me to restate the question?
I'm good.
Okay.
So MnSHIP has a 20-year state highway investment plan, and they have 3 different options, 3 different approaches that they sent out. And when you look at it, there's no real solid answer on what the best solution is. They want people to make the decision on that. Right now, 31% of our highway funds, federal highway, let's see if I'm sorry, I'm not an expert in the numbers here, but 31% of the funding comes from federal highway, 21% vehicle tax, 8% motor vehicle sales tax, 31% fuel excise tax, and 8% state trunk highway. The number $600 million shortage comes up a lot. I'm not sure how accurate that is, but I haven't looked at the numbers to really tell you. I can tell you this. We have had a lot of road work done in this area. Highway 14 corridor is getting accomplished. You go up and down. A lot of this stuff is happening because of legislators up and down 14, and some of the people in this room have helped with that. In Mankato here, we're going to be looking at Mankato and North Mankato. They're going to be looking at the 169 coming up here. So they're raising money for that to do a survey on what we're going to be doing for 169. The Highway 14 169 intersection is another thing that we're taking care of. There is money to get this done. I don't think that the number 1 tax state in the nation has to raise taxes again for the roads. I think there's other ways to get this accomplished. It's just going to take hard work and figure out how to do it. And raising taxes isn't the answer. Not in this state anyways, I don't think. I'm going to continue to support corridors of commerce and work with the people there. I have relationships with people from Winona all the way over to Laverne. And outstate, we have to stick together when it comes to this with our funding. So honestly, it's just keep supporting the corridors of commerce and work from there.
Great, thanks. All right, well, there are 2 sure things in life, death and taxes. So let's talk about taxes. Since death is just too depressing, right? With taxes, I guess everyone loves that. So the main task for the legislature during the 2019 session will be to write the next state budget. Current revenue collections are strong, and the most recent budget forecast shows the state will have a surplus, though there remains uncertainty in Minnesota's long-term fiscal outlook. What would your priorities be when it comes to taxes and spending? If you believe state spending should be less, in what areas would you seek reductions? And what areas of the state budget should see more funding, if any? And Joe, you get the honor of the first crack at that question.
Sure. Constitutionally, we're looking at education, public safety, and transportation. Those are 3 things that need to be taken care of. I have family that are teachers. And one of the things I just did a story on Franklin. They did a little marathon, walkathon, to raise money so that they could do field trips and the teachers could each get $100 for the classroom. I don't think our kids should be raising money for the teachers. I think that should be supplied. That's frustrating on my end when I see that happening. And that's our public school there. We have to make sure those 3 things are taken care of first before we get into other services. Plain and simple. I said that we're the highest tax state in the nation. You know, we have fees that they don't want to call taxes, but those are taxes. We have to look at making things more efficient. I was part of the state workforce development council, and we did welfare reform. And we found duplications in services where monies were being paid to another organization for a service that someone else did. I'm sure that's grown back. I'm sure that hasn't been looked at because a lot of the things that I helped do are now back to the way they were. So we have to make sure that we cut duplication and we make the government more efficient. But we have to make sure that the government works for the people. Now, this is a county matter, but I'll tell you a real simple problem I had. When I was sick and all of a sudden I needed help, I had to go to 4 different buildings around town to get the basic services. Now, I had family and friends to drive me around. What happens to the people that are new in town and they don't have someone to drive them around? That's called efficiency, and we lack it. And we lack efficiency in a lot of areas, and we just have to make sure things are more efficient. And sometimes that ends up costing a little bit, and sometimes it ends up costing less when you do that. So that's, I'd really have to see the whole budget where things are going, but once we take care of those top 3, I'd look at everything.
Jack, your thoughts on?
Would you repeat the question?
I'd be happy to. So the gist of the question is we've got some good revenue collections at the state level. There's still some uncertainty in the state budget forecast. And so what would your priorities be when it comes to taxes and spending? What would you spend more on? What would you spend less on? And why?
Right now, I'm kind of glad Joe brought up education. Both years that I have been there for the budget year, Governor Dayton did veto the initial education bill, and both times it came back at a reasonable level. One of the funniest things I ever saw was Representative Loon stand up and try to take credit for that after it passed the second time. And just looked up and said, "You're actually trying to take credit for the governor vetoing your first bill." That's amazing. But we have needs, and we have neglected those needs for 20 years. We have crumbling infrastructure, not only bridges and highways, but buildings and historical sites. The Minnesota state system alone has some backlog of $900 million in deferred maintenance. We need to start taking care of some of that. There's not a person here that owns a home that would wait until it got more and more expensive to fix their house. You have to take care of these problems when they first come in. And again, I've mentioned home health aides and personal care attendants haven't had a raise in 10 years, and they take care of our most vulnerable adults. They have been shortchanged. There are things that we need to address. The shortage in the prison. Again, these are long-term problems that are coming to a head. And as far as taxes for that are fees, let's remember who did that. That was Tim Pawlenty when he was there, brought in a whole lot of things and said, well, these aren't really taxes, these are fees. But we got to start talking about the services that we get for the taxes too. Denmark is one of the highest taxed countries in the world. It approaches 50%. But they don't discuss that. They discuss what they are getting for the fees, for the taxes. And they are routinely ranked as the happiest people on earth. We need to set the expectation of what the services are that we expect and then start working out how to pay for them. But we do need to address 20 years of neglect in our prison systems, in our highways, in our schools. We need to have border-to-border broadband. Our children in greater Minnesota are getting shortchanged. They cannot access the internet. They have stories all over the state about kids driving in from the farms and doing their homework next to the public library or the school because that's the only place they can get internet. If we want them to compete in a global market, we're going to need to invest. And right now, while we have a surplus, that's the time to do it. Thank you.
Well, Patrick, since you led me into this so beautifully and went with taxes, I'll do death. That's a little dark. It's not really death, but Minnesota is kind of facing a senior care crisis right now with the baby boomers starting to retire and huge numbers, but the senior care network really doesn't have adequate staff and facilities to be able to handle all those additional people. And how do you think the state should address this, what could be a looming crisis? Jack?
A couple of the endorsements that I am most proud of: Leading Age Minnesota, the people that are doing this, Care Providers of Minnesota, they have both endorsed me. Yes, it has to be addressed. We have, again, while we're having more people that need the services, we have less and less people that are willing to do it. You can go to Quick Trip, you can go to McDonald's, make more money, and not have to do the same kind of work. I worked at the state security hospital, had my ribs broken, worked in a jail. I'd go back and do either one of those jobs before I would do some of the jobs that they do. We're going to have to invest in people. That is the backbone of the system, and unless we do so, yeah, we're going to have a crisis.
Joe, would you like the question restated?
No, that's good. Thank you. My father's in a long-term care facility in Florida right now, and it could be a long-term care facility in Mankato. We have the same problems. Understaffed, underappreciated, underpaid, and I don't know a solution to it right now. I mean, I wish I did. When you're a scientist, I'm a biochemist, and when you study science, you realize that you're going into a field where you may not make a lot of money, or you're going to end up working a lot of holidays. Nurses always work holidays. Doctors don't necessarily work holidays, but some of them are on call. When I was on the Workforce Council to fill some of the void, we set up a 2-year RN program at South Central College. That was at some of the smaller schools here in the state to try to fill that void. And then they went on to get 4-year degrees and get out of the facilities. We have to be creative, again, coming up with another solution to get more workers into these facilities. And that was a brilliant plan. I didn't come up with it, but I was part of that program. And we have to come up with other ideas like that. We're going to have to put minds together. We're going to have to talk to the owners of these facilities and find out what they're willing to do, because they're going to have to make some investment for our state as a business. They're making profits. We have to make sure that they make some investments also in their workers to draw more people into it. But
Go ahead, Jack.
And this isn't a rebuttal. In nursing homes, the average stay for an RN is 18 months. As soon as they have enough experience, they move to a clinic or a hospital where they'll make $10 an hour more than what they are making in a nursing home or working with people in a aging or disability facility. And you can't ask them not to do that, but that is the source. We're going to have to pay them.
All right. Let's go to the other end of the spectrum and talk about children and talk about childcare in particular. We've talked a little bit tonight, but let's dig into it a little more. So over the past several years, this issue of childcare has become a growing concern, particularly the lack of availability of childcare in greater Minnesota. In fact, recent data from First Children's Finance of Minnesota shows that our area has a gap of about 1,000 childcare slots. Many community leaders see this as one of the primary obstacles to developing a strong workforce and creating economic growth. What is the state's role in addressing the shortage of childcare in greater Minnesota? Are there policies or programs that the state should adopt that will increase the supply of childcare? And I believe, Jack, are you the first one? There we go.
nope, he had nursing. This is such a huge issue. I started covering it when I started the paper in 2013. And at that time, it was unionization. A lot of the child care providers didn't want unionization, but that was a big push. And then it became regulations. And it's a very unfair playing field right now with the over-regulations. Individuals aren't treated the same. And you can't have that. I mean, everyone has to be treated, the law is a law, the rule is a rule, and it has to be applied the same. That's a big, big, big problem we have here. When I ran a financial planning firm, I spoke up at the state of Minnesota as a keynote, and I thought I didn't know a lot about child care, and they said I was going to speak in front of a group of child care providers. Well, you open this up, the whole room was full. And the majority of them didn't make a lot of money. Majority of them were females, but the majority of them wanted to make the most of what they had. They didn't necessarily do this business because they wanted to be rich. They did it because they loved working with children. Some of them loved being able to stay at home with their own, and then it just expanded into it. But we've taken that away. We're starting to take that away in the state of Minnesota. And it's rather offensive to me when a small business gets pushed out, and they're getting pushed out because we're doing all of this, push them into the school. And when we're pushing them into the school, the pre-K, get them all prepared, what's that do to the small business? It takes their money away because these kids are no longer going to their services. They're going to the schools, and the schools don't play by the same rules. They don't have the same number of, they can have double, I think, the number of kids that a private care can have. It doesn't make any sense. So we have to get government out of the way when it comes to that. And I think the market will take care of itself when we do that.
Jack, your thoughts on childcare and how we address the current shortage?
The Center for Rural Policy and Development out of St. Peter said that the main problem is that there is a fundamental gap between what it costs to provide child care and what child care people can reasonably expect to charge and what parents can afford to pay. That is, in their opinion, the number one problem. Again, I mentioned the CCAP. The working family tax credit would be another way to put money into the hands of parents that are starting out. We need to address it so that child care providers can make a living. I believe Joe's right that people aren't in there to get rich, but again, they want to be able to feed their own children and have a decent life. Regulations are a problem, and again, Senator Frentz, Clark Johnson and I met with DHS last December, Reggie Williams, and said, we want you to start reviewing these one at a time, and three things. Do we need to repeal it? Do we need to modify it? Or do we need to look at further training for the daycare providers? Met with Jeff Brand and I just recently met with in-home providers. We got an earful, and if I am lucky enough to prevail at the end of this, in November, December, I have staff lined up to come down and meet with them so that the providers can help write the bills. When we have been told of specific regulations, and the one I point to on a regular basis is the one that required in-home people to have their children fingerprinted when they're 13 to 17. That was brought before us, as were a couple others. Strong bipartisan support to get rid of those. In fact, in public safety, I spoke on that one. I said I would be angry if I was a 15, 16-year-old young man and had to have fingerprints because my mom was running a daycare. That made no sense. But there are others too. When we are talking about regulations, though, and it's being brought to us, we need to know what the regulation is. One of the frustrations in this is having somebody talk about the number of citations about something and not telling us, well, okay, what regulation are we talking about? So that would be real specific. And again, we're going to go back, we're going to look at those regulations. There are a couple, again, the in-home people were talking about some things that they were getting fined for, and I looked up and went, I got grandchildren at my house and I do that. And some of the things that when my son was growing up, specifically I remember being told we needed to place him on his stomach or on his side, he and his sister, in case they choked. Now if you do that, you get fined for it. That's ridiculous. This changes every couple of years, and again, we need to go step by step, go through them. Do they need to be repealed? Do they need to be modified, or do we need to have more training for the providers to help them understand? My take is that if we've got an inspector that is writing a lot of citations, that inspector is not doing their job. Their job is to make daycare work, and so they should be acting like a coach, a mentor, and trying to help people succeed in daycare, not trying to find fault.
As Minnesota's economy continues to grow and the population continues to age, there's a growing shortage of workers to fill existing jobs overall. And Greater Mankato Growth has estimated that the region will be short about 3,000 workers over the next 5 years. From your perspective, what are the key strategies for making sure that Minnesota has an abundant and qualified workforce now and in the future?
Every year, the second day of the legislature, they have a One Minnesota conference, which is just for legislators. Media is not allowed to come into it. And so actually 2 years ago, we started hearing about this from the state demographer. We have, of course, again, daycare, so that if people want to work, they are confident that their children are in a spot where they are comfortable and safe. But we're going to need to reach out to the new Americans. We're going to need to reach out to other underserved groups that, frankly, have not been part of our economy. We have a large Somali population here in Mankato that is willing to work, hardworking, but they're going to need to have training. We're going to need to look at people in greater Minnesota that have not had access to college or vocational school. We need to make sure that they can get jobs by better training. One of the mistakes, frankly, that we made a few years ago was eliminating most vocational programs in schools. And I've been working with the Minnesota River Builders Association here in town. Last year we spent about 6 months. We got a little pilot project going on in West High School. Not every kid is destined for college. And we need to recognize that, and we need to encourage them on a path towards success that may not include college.
Joe, do you need the question?
No, that's good. When I worked for Hutchinson Manufacturing, one of the toughest things we had was to find welders. Not only for first shift, but second shift, and especially third shift. And one of the ideas I came up with was to work directly with the students at the technical school there. It's at Hutch Manufacturing, or at Hutch Technical School. To get these kids trained exactly how they want them trained so that they'd come into our business, get them to sign a contract, and then they'd get experience. And we'd have people that were able to move on to the next shifts and start that cycle. The trade schools are so important, and the businesses have to communicate with their schooling, or be it high school, all the way through the colleges, of what they need in the area and get the kids educated in the fields. I mean, that's what the schools are all about, is getting people in an adult life. And it's businesses have to be responsible for that also. I mean, if you're short people, you go to the source where you get people. And you say, we want you, we're going to help train you. And you work together. I mean, that's the easiest answer. Now, when we don't have enough people, that's where GMG comes in. I mean, you recruit. You tell our story about our community. And you make it enticing, and then you bring them in. And that's a big, big thing. Communication is huge, and that's the biggest part to it. And yes, we have a lot of we have an East African community now that we haven't had before, and they're learning want to become citizens here because they're refugees, and so a lot of things are different. Thank goodness for the tapestry program that we have in Mankato. That's really helped out and helped bring the community into understanding what America's like, which is important because they didn't have some of the things we have now. And now we're bringing them in. I know up at South Central College, a lot are learning nursing. I mean, that's a big thing. A lot of I've seen, when I'm sure you've seen this when you've visited some of the assisted living places. We have a lot of immigrants working in those facilities. Very caring, and it's a field where they want to work in, so that's where they start. And so we just have to make sure we reach out and take advantage of everything to give people an opportunity.
All right. Let's turn to healthcare. While the number of uninsured Minnesotans has dropped since enactment of the Affordable Care Act and the subsequent implementation of MNsure, Health insurers are concerned about the financial stability of the health insurance market, and Minnesotans are experiencing dramatic increases in health insurance premiums. How would you propose to improve health care in Minnesota? And Joe, you're up.
Yeah, the MNsure has been an abomination from day one. Not a Republican supported it, and there's a good reason behind it, because it was all negotiated without the help of insurance agents. They went to the heads of insurance companies. Well, they didn't care. Their job is to make the company money. The insurance agent's the one who goes out and sees people and understands the family problems. Our premiums have gone up. One of the Taylor corporations, I was just talking to an employee, his rates are going up 30% this year. So it's not just part of the MNsure, it's our whole insurance program is awful. Representative Munson did a transparency bill. We have to keep expanding that. Now we have to do transparency for pharmacies. We have to open up competition. We have to let more insurance companies come in that meet our standards. We have to look at going across state lines, interstate, for health insurance. And we just have to make sure that we know what people are paying for their fees, because that is a problem. When Mayo opened up at Hy-Vee and they had their price structure and they told me as a reporter, these are the prices. And then I had someone say, those prices aren't what I was paying. And I went back to Mayo and I said, why are these prices different for them? They said, well, it depends on the insurance that they have. That's a problem. That was telling a member of the media not quite the full truth. And if they're not telling me the truth and I'm reporting it because we expect it to be the truth, well, that's a problem. We have to make sure that doesn't happen. That's where transparency will come in.
Jack, your thoughts on healthcare?
Well, first, MNsure is not an insurance program. It is a portal where you can line up different insurances and help you buy insurance. It's not a program. But to actually get the prices down, last year we gave insurance companies $500 million, that's a B, with no expectations of what they were going to do with it. The individual market had some dramatic decreases this year. Thank goodness for the Affordable Care Act, because Blue Cross and Blue Shield will now be sending refund checks out for the people that were overcharged. That was a provision in the Affordable Care Act. But when we saw the decreases in the insurance rates, first of all, that was for 155,000 people, the people that were in the individual market. That wasn't across the state. The other thing is it did absolutely nothing for deductibles. So if your insurance premium went down and you still have a $6,000 or $12,000 deductible, it's still worthless. Clark Johnson, rep across the river over there, came up with an idea to allow a buy-in for Minnesota Care. This would not affect taxpayers. It would be self-sufficient. That's the way it is designed. That would be a really good first step in controlling costs. It would provide more competition for the insurance companies that largely have abandoned these people. The other thing is that, and I don't know why it doesn't get more press, but there are 26 counties now that do county-based purchasing. They stepped in and acted as insurance agents in their counties, and they are now the highest reimbursing counties in the state for Medicare. We cannot find dentists in southern Minnesota that are willing to accept it. Itasca County alone has 22 dental providers that will do so because they get reimbursed at a better rate. They have taken the administrative fees, they have plowed it back in to the programs, and at this point they are offering services that the other counties cannot afford to do so. So that, if you live in the greater Minnesota county, I would go to your county commissioners and talk about getting into county-based purchasing, because they're having wonderful success. And I'm not going to shy away from it. Long term, we need to do what every other industrial country has done and have universal health care. It is delivered for half of what we have. We have the best doctors, we have the best hospitals, we do not have the best system. They have higher life expectancies in all these countries. They have lower infant mortality rates. It is wildly popular. The least popular country is at 70%. I cannot remember when 70% of Americans agree about something. When Great Britain, a couple of people tried to do away with their system, they quickly backed down. The three things are: it works, it delivers the system, it is done for half of what we pay, and they have better results.
Some cities in Minnesota, go ahead.
I'm not sure why everyone comes to our country for Mayo's service when they have universal health care. I can tell you this, universal health care is gonna cost. It's just like Medicare. We're gonna lose doctors and we're gonna lose small town clinics and small town hospitals because they cannot afford to be paid 50 cents on the dollar. The way they're getting paid now is when they take Medicare, they only take so many because they don't get paid enough to keep their doors open. And that's just never gonna work here.
They come to the United States because we have the best hospitals and the best doctors. There is a guy here in town, a financial planner. His brother-in-law was Canadian. The Canadian doctors did say to him, "You have 3 months to live, go home, get your affairs in order. We have done all we can for you." He did not accept that. He went to Rochester. He went to the Mayo Clinic. 3 months later, as the Canadian doctors predicted, he died. He was also $750,000 poor for it. There are times when you need to step back and accept the fact that we are all going to die.
Some cities in Minnesota have recently put in place their own ordinances related to things like the minimum wage and paid time off and other requirements of the workplace. Do you support those initiatives? If you don't, would you support an effort to ensure that those decisions are only made at the state level?
I'm sorry, repeat.
Sure. Some cities in Minnesota have recently put things in place like minimum wages and paid time off and other workplace requirements. So do you support those initiatives? And if you don't, would you support an effort to ensure that those decisions are made only at the state level and not the local one?
I struggle with this one. This has been done in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and they face a different set of circumstances than we do here in Mankato. Frankly, I don't see it happening in Mankato. So it has been something, I say, that I've struggled with. Our minimum wage right now, I believe, is about $9.50. Is that what it currently is? Is it higher than that? $9.80. Okay. I'm not aware of anybody that's actually paying that anymore. Even the home health aides are getting $11 an hour. McDonald's, there are some real advantages to having a labor shortage. I do like uniformity, though, and consistency across the state. But you do have, again, if you're trying to raise a family in Minneapolis or St. Paul, it's not the same as doing it here. A $200,000 home on Lake Minnetonka is a tool shed, but in Mapleton or Lake Crystal, that's a really nice house. So we have some differences in there. And to be honest, like I said, I struggle with this, and I've gone back and forth. For the big cities, I think it's a good idea. I just don't think it'll work out here.
Sure. Some cities in Minnesota have recently put things in place, like their own minimum wages or paid time off, maternity leave, things like that. Do you support those initiatives? And if you don't, would you support an effort to make sure that those decisions are made only at the state level and not local?
Do I support that? It depends on what they're doing. Dog ordinance, who cares? When it comes to finance, setting a wage base, I don't support that at all. It should be at the state level.
All right, let's go back to immigration. We started on that a little bit in the conversation about workforce, but as you know, around our community, many see the addition of new Americans as a key strategy for dealing with our current workforce shortage. In fact, in Minnesota, the only reason that our population is growing is because of immigrants. However, the current national discussion around immigration and welcoming refugees is one of the most divisive issues in American politics today. As an elected leader, what strategies would you pursue to enhance the state's role in welcoming immigrants and refugees into the state's workforce? What is your perspective of that?
Sure. I think Mankato has led the way, and I'll start with the Tapestry program, when it comes to working with our new immigrants. Making sure that they understand they're welcome, making sure they understand our system, and making sure they understand how safe they are. Because a lot, when they come here, they're not used to police being friendly. When the police come, that wasn't a good thing in their country. So some countries, that's a problem. And we're talking East Africa here. But now we have people come from other parts of the world also. Every day, Russia would be an example. We have to make sure that they are part of our system. And, other than making sure we have the welcome wagon, which is important, make sure that they understand that we have housing and how our systems work. That's the biggest thing you do. I love that we had in Mankato, all the different communities that we have in here that have come in and introduced some new culture to us. Because when I grew up, you had the Germans and you had the Swiss, and you had you'd go over to Northfield. So we had a lot of Scandinavian. And now we're starting to get from different cultures that are coming in, which bring different foods for us. I just ate at the Brothers grocery and restaurant the other day. Honestly, how many people have had goat before the East Africans started coming here serving it? It's not a lot of us. That just wasn't on the menu. We had rouladen in our house, or sauerkraut. So we have a lot of benefits there. The university here, I've always taken advantage of the international groups that are here and learn about their cultures. And so that has really spilled out and really helped us a lot. So just, there's no laws that need to be made. We just have to make sure that we welcome them. And I think our community's been pretty darn good about that.
Jack, what are your thoughts on this issue of welcoming immigrants?
Well, first of all, thank you. I used to volunteer for the Tapestry program until I got into the state legislature, and it is an excellent program. The reality is that we need them for our economics. Now, the question did not differentiate, and I believe everything you talked about with people here that are here legally. But our national system is broken, and we need reform in it. There needs to be a clear direction for people to gain citizenship. It used to be that if you served in the military. Now, recently, that has been denied them. So you can go out and risk your life for this country, but then you won't get citizenship. I was astonished to find out. I go up to the University of Minnesota, it's for weight loss, but I have a doctor up there, and I talked to her, and she is an Eastern European. She has been here for 12 years. She's hoping that in 3 years, she will be able to become a citizen. This is a doctor, highly educated. She's in internal medicine. And she's not been able to get. So we have some problems that need to be addressed as far as having a clear path for citizenship and reforming it so that it's workable for people that are hardworking, want to come here and help our economy. One of the things that I read recently about Social Security, one of the main things that is keeping Social Security afloat is that they estimate in the last 20 years that illegal aliens have put $50 billion into Social Security with no hope of ever collecting any benefits. That's wrong, but again, they contribute and they are helping keep our economy afloat. Thank you.
Can't really do a forum around here without bringing up agriculture. Many rural communities, that represents the largest economic sector and source of employment. And our friends over here at Greater Mankato Growth have launched Green Seam recently. It might have to go up because my face is on it. Anyway, agriculture represents the biggest economic sector and source of employment in a lot of rural communities. And Greater Mankato Growth launched Green Seam. If you haven't heard of it, that's meant to position our region as sort of the go-to spot for talent and business, innovation, education that all relates to agriculture. So how would you work to further the state's ag economy and make sure that Greater Minnesota remains economically vital?
I'm a big fan of the Green Seam program. In fact, recently contacted the University of Minnesota. They have a program that's called Bringing the U to You. And this past month, October 17th, they had one that was all about agriculture. And I strongly suggested they should be bringing that down to Mankato and partnering with Green Seam. They declined to do so, but that's not over yet. I will forever remain proud that my very first bill in the legislature was agriculture related. As our relations with Cuba have thawed, I had a bill that received broad bipartisan support, which was to send the Commissioner of Agriculture down to Cuba, find out what the new rules are and how Minnesota can take advantage of this opening up of Cuba. Cuba is one of the few places on earth where Minnesota farmers actually have an advantage. They can ship directly down the Mississippi and right to Cuba. Everything else they've got to ship to the East Coast or the West Coast and then ship it. So there is a 1992 paper that I read about the fact that we can triple the amount of exports to Cuba that was done by the Agricultural Department, $40 to $60 million more. Anyway, the first part was for the mission. The second part of it was to come back and tell family farmers and spread the word. The big boys, Cargill, ADM, they're already down there and they're already doing business. But this bill was strictly for family farmers. I am going to probably at some point call Kevin Papp and ask why he didn't invite me out to his farm the other night when he had the Consul General of Cuba there for that. I believe that is why what is almost 100% of a Republican endorsement Farm Bureau, I earn a no endorsement in the race. I'm hoping at some point to actually get their endorsement. I am endorsed by the National Farmers Union.
We are an ag town. We always have been. Probably 30% of our income in this community is because of the agriculture, be it through implement dealers, be it through Honeymead, Ridley. Ethanol's played a big part of that. They've changed what they do with some of the crops to make it into a biofuel. We have to keep looking at innovation with that. One of the things that I discovered when I was up at the VA for 14 days is I couldn't get a fresh vegetable to save my life. I had friends bringing up vegetables so I could have a healthy snack, but I could throw a rock out my window and hit a farm. We have to start being creative to make some of the smaller farmers open up the doors and be able to work with the VA. I mean, MVAC has a program here where we have local farmers. They clean the food for them, prepare it, and then people can buy it. We need to be a little bit creative with stuff like that, and that would be one of the programs that I'd work hard at, working with the veterans area and the farmers combined. Farming has changed a lot over the years. When I grew up, everyone in my neighborhood from West Cato, we all either walked beans, picked melons, corn detasseled. We all had some connection. Now those farmers no longer do it. They use fertilizers. So the kids don't get the same connection with the farms that we did growing up. Is that bad? It's different. The kids unfortunately have to work at McDonald's or they have to work at a grocery store instead of being able to be outside working, but a little bit different. We just have to be creative and looking at different markets and pushing that.
All right. So, the election just across the state in Minnesota is one of the most closely watched. It's been pretty contentious. So my question is the same one I asked at the last forum for the 19A race is, what is something you think the public, the media, or your opponent either get wrong or don't understand about you? Joe, you get the first to answer that one.
I don't know. Has there been anything negative out there? Jack, have you seen anything from our side against you?
No.
Yeah, I didn't think so, and I haven't either. I think we've run a pretty good, clean race here, and I don't know if there's anything misunderstood. I've been running on the issues I've been running on, that I didn't accept any endorsements, I didn't accept any PAC money. But running a campaign on $8,000, I could have raised a lot more, but I chose not to because I want to keep money out of politics. And what better way to do it than be leading by an example? And that's what I'm doing, going out door to door and meeting people. And I think that's the old way we used to do it, and I'd like it to be that way again.
I'd kind of like to piggyback a little bit on what Joe said. It's not something that, I'm not sure that there's anything that people misunderstand. I've got 20 years of public records that you can look at and see, and it's going to be consistent. But the thing about the clean politics, we need to stand together for that. In my first race in 2014, and I see Mr. Cruz back there, 2 weeks, I believe, before the election, a postcard went out about Mr. Cruz from the state DFL. And I didn't actually find out about it until almost election time. But as soon as I got up to St. Paul, I had a little discussion with Ken Martin, who is the DFL state chair. And I looked at him and I said, don't ever do that again. In fact, I do not want you ever helping me again. We don't do things like that in Mankato. Don't ever help me again. And I apologize about that. I didn't know about it, and if I had known about it at the time, I would have denounced it. 2 years ago, I called the guy that was doing the independent expenditures for the DFL, and I said, I'd like to talk to you. And he goes, no, you can't coordinate with independent expenditures. And I said, Dave, you're not getting the gist of this. I said, if you find out or hear about anybody saying that they want to help me, you tell them to stay the hell out of Mankato. I do not want their help. We have had for, I would say, the last 20, 25 years, reasonably clean elections in Mankato, and I really hope that we can keep that. And again, I appreciate the fact that I haven't seen anything negative about myself, but I have made it clear to the folks in St. Paul that they are never to do that here on my behalf. I won't stand for it. When it happens, you need to denounce it, and you need to go after the people and tell them to stop. I can't watch TV anymore. It's disgusting. And I'm hoping as a community we'll stand together on this and not bring our local politics down into the gutter. Thank you.
Well, you guys have been around in this town for a little while. A lot of people out here have been around in this town a little while, but you also have to appeal to people like me, a couple of years in town, don't know the community as well as you guys do. So what would you tell me and other voters like me about the attributes of your district and the things about the district you like most?
Mankato's been going through a renaissance. I'd like to say it actually coincides with the time I got on the city council. It kind of does, but I really can't take credit for all of it. It has been a real honor, and it has been a tremendous joy to contribute to it. But I have served with numerous council people and mayors, there's Eric back there, that have all contributed. We have done so, I believe, done well by working together. When I'm in St. Paul and I am bragging about Mankato, there are times they don't believe it. I say business people, nonprofits, government people get together and we work together to come up with solutions. I've attended 3 out of the 6, I think it is now, inner city leadership. When we went to Columbia, Missouri, they looked at us and went, Minneapolis was here, they brought 35 people. Mankato, I think, brought 110. We have an engaged populace that works together, and we've been really successful. I mean, I believe that maybe the one thing that we all have in common is how incredibly proud we are of our community, and it's the reason that we're working forward and moving forward together. That needs to continue too. That has been the key to our success. We need to reach out, like I say, to the new Americans and bring them into that kind of. You have to teach it. It just doesn't happen. Minnesota Nice just doesn't happen. You have to go out and model it, and you have to teach it. Have I come close to answering the question?
I believe you have.
Kind of got off on a little tangent there. Yeah, I'm extremely proud of this community. Eric was there when I retired from the council. Having grown up on Air Force bases around the world, I didn't have a clue as to what a hometown was, and didn't until I came to Mankato. Now I know what it means.
Joe?
The easiest story to tell is about Eagle Lake and Mankato. When I was in the service, I had an opportunity to move anywhere, and I decided to come back here because of the people. And it's just continually gotten better. Eagle Lake is the second fastest growing city, I think. They're number 1, they're number 2 now in the state. Wonderful things are happening there. Mankato continues to get better. I mean, you name it, we have it here. And if it's not good enough, we're an hour away from where they can get a little bit more expensive shows. We have universities. We have some of the best schooling that you could ever ask for in the state of Minnesota. The universities bring us culture that most communities wouldn't have. We have a strong international department here. We're a regional hub which brings in people from other communities into our town. So we have a reason to be somewhere. I mean, people just want to come to Mankato, the big city. When we had the Walmart distribution center, people from 50 miles away were calling. I'm sure GMG got many phone calls, when's it going to open? Because all of a sudden we had a job that was going to pay a lot, and they all wanted it. And they knew that was good for them. And we're also a compassionate community because we try not to step on toes of other smaller towns and take away with what they have. You look at Rapidan. So many people talk about the dam store down there. That's part of the bike tour that we have every year, every fall. We have marathons. We have concerts. What we don't have is high crime, which is a good thing. We have crime, but we don't have the high crime. We don't have a lot of the violent crime for a micropolitan community. We're a safe community, and we're a community that comes together when people are in need. There is a benefit almost every day in this community for someone who has cancer, someone that has any problem, financial problem. People come together and they throw money and they throw an event to make sure they're taken care of when they ask for help. So that's why you should stay here. Those are some pretty powerful things that most every other community really shoots for.
Great. Well, we are coming up to 8:30, so let's move along to our closing statements. Jack, since you got the first word, we'll give Joe the last word, and we'll invite you to make your closing statement. Jack. Joe will get the final word.
Oh, I thought you would go first.
Yep.
You want to go first? That's fine. I kind of thought it was your turn, so I didn't want to jump in ahead of you. Again, I am running for re-election. I have spent 20 years giving back to this community. Grew up around the world. My wife and I actually sat down and at one point looked at each other and said, where are we going to live? And at that point, I was going, Georgia's really nice about 6-7 months of the year in the spring and fall. But she pointed out that their school system was in the toilet at that time and that we didn't want to go there. So, yes, this was a choice to stay here in Mankato and raise our children. And by the time our children were starting West High School, I wanted to give back. That's when I first ran in 1998. Yes, we had such an outstanding experience with the school system, with the various leagues, the YMCA. It is a great place to raise children. And so at the time I thought, well, I'll run for one term of the city council. And then one led to another and another, and then pretty soon it was 16 years. And I thought, oh, I'm done. I realized when Kathy Bryant called me and said, I'm retiring tomorrow, I initially went, I don't think I want to do that. But 16 years on the council and these inner city leadership had given me a background that I believe is going to be hard to replicate. You have delved into every issue in the city of Mankato and the surrounding areas, and it has continued to be a joy to me to engage in public service. Like I say, when I get a chance to help somebody from the community, that is a real high. There are a couple more things, like I said earlier, that I would like to continue and see through to conclusion, and that's why I'm running. I hope you will consider me, and I would like the honor of representing you for 2 more years and to pursue these goals that I have at the state legislature. Thank you.
And Joe, you get the last word.
Thank you. Thank you again, everyone, for showing up tonight. The reason why I'm running is simple. I'm going to give a different perspective representing Mankato. 35 years we've had a Democrat in charge. When you look at the state of Minnesota, you go from Bemidji down, it's 5 Republicans to 1 Democrat when you take out the metropolitan area. A lot of outstate small legislators that do not understand Mankato. They don't understand the dynamics of it. And when you have someone from the party, and I'm assuming the Republicans are going to continue carrying the House, they're going to hear a different story. They're going to actually hear from another Republican, hey, we need some of these things here. Here's how we're looking at it for a community. that's a little bit different. That's a different message that they haven't heard from this area in a long, long, long time. And I think that's very important. I think that will help us out quite a bit. I've never wanted to be a politician. This was not a goal of mine, an ambition of mine, but I just saw too many problems that we have within the state that need to be taken care of, and they haven't been getting taken care of. I'm a consensus builder. I've always been good at that. And that's something that I'll bring to the Capitol, bring to St. Paul. And when I don't necessarily have to agree with what we're doing here. If we have a good idea in this town and it passed the muster, I'm going to carry it up there. And when you're in the majority, it makes a big, big difference. They're going to listen a lot better than when it's coming from a minority party. And that's just sort of the way it is. That's politics. But that's something that we need, and I think I'd be good at it. So I'd appreciate your vote come this Tuesday if you haven't voted already. And thank you again. Thanks for hosting. Good job. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Let's give our two candidates a round of applause. And thank you all for being here. I appreciate you showing up and doing your civic duty and learning from these candidates. And make sure that you do go cast your vote between now and November 6th. And we look forward to a great election day in Minnesota. Thank you very much for being here. Have a great night.